Hello and welcome to week three's tutorials in Excel. We're going to be continuing to learn various kind of intermediate and advanced features of Excel. For the first video, we're going to be learning a little bit about cleaning up the data. So a lot of times you get data that has to be modified in various forms. Then we're going to do a fairly easy lesson on inserting a table to make your data interactive and allow easy filtering of the data. And then we're going to be doing some advanced if statements. So we've learned a traditional if. This is going to be using additional if statements that include an if or, an if and, or a nested if, an if within an if. And then we'll have a lesson where we practice some of these things on our own. And then we'll have a second set of tutorials on macros. So macros is where you're able to record a series of different actions that you do, steps and functions and formulas that you create in Excel, and make them automatically execute on their own with a click of a button. And the last lesson, so we'll have a couple of those, and then the last lesson is going to be VBA code, which is a computer programming language that gets generated when you record a macro. And that'll lead into next week's lessons where we're going to learn how to create our own computer programs using the embedded Excel VBA code. So let's go ahead and get started by downloading the file that we're going to be using in the first four videos. So after I enable the editing, I come to a list of instructions, and the first set is on the data cleansing. So we're going to be doing a function called trim, a function called right, which is just one of many that are related. So you could do left or mid to in addition to the right. Then we're going to be learning about copy, paste values, and an edit, replace, which we've already done in the previous set of videos. So let's get started by learning the trim. So sometimes you download data into Excel from a source that has some garbage in it, for lack of a better term. So I'm going to click on the recent sales. And in the city column, we have a list of different cities and zip codes. Now we've learned that we can go up to our column headings, and when our mouse becomes this cross symbol, we can double click to resize the column, and it automatically makes it just as wide as it needs to be. So I could do the same thing here for the baths column. Notice how it shrunk the baths column to just as wide as it needed to be to accommodate the size of the heading. But in the city column, it acted a little funny. If I double click to resize it, it actually makes it bigger than it needs to be. And that tells me that there's what I call garbage, excess spaces in the city column. So there's a function called trim that allows you to get rid of extraneous spaces in the column. So I'm going to click on Insert to create a new column, and I'll replicate the heading. And now I'm going to enter a formula equals trim, and the only parameter for the trim is either a cell reference or a list of text. So I'm going to select the first cell, T2, and then I'll double click to autofill that for the remainder of the column. And now if I resize, notice that it's only as big as the largest entry. Okay, now suppose we didn't want to retain both of these city columns. So we've got one that is cleaned up. We don't really need this old one anymore. So what would happen if I just selected column T and then selected delete? So it got rid of that existing one, but notice now I have errors in my city column that I just created. That's because it was referencing cells that are now gone. So let me undo that. And let me create yet another new column. And now I'm going to do what's called a copy and paste values. So normally when you do a copy and paste, so if I select column T and select copy, normally when I paste, it simply pastes the formulas that I had created in the original column and adjusted for where I'm pasting to. We've already been through that where we assign an absolute reference when we don't want that to change. So let's undo that and look at a different way to do it, because I don't want to retain both of these columns just so I can have a trim function. I just want this data cleaned up. So another way to do that is to copy it. I'm going to hit escape in order to unselect it. Now I'm going to select it again, right click and copy. And now rather than paste, I'm going to select this option in the right click menu called paste values. And you can see there's a few different paste values and formatting. I'm just going to do plain old values. And now when I double click, I have the trimmed version, but now I just have the data pasted. I don't have any formulas in my data. So now I can delete both of these the original column and the one with the trim function. And now I have a cleaned up city column without any of the formulas. Okay, suppose I wanted to, in this column that we were just working with city, suppose I wanted to have a separate column for the zip code. So I could insert a new column and put a heading for zip. And one thing I could do is use a function called write. And write returns the characters from the end of a text string. So it looks at the rightmost characters of the, whatever cell you're working with. So the write function, if we put it up in a function window, let me search for write. You can see it has text, which in this case we would have a cell reference, cell S2, and then how many characters do you want to take from that string? So I'm picking 5, and that's going to put the 5 rightmost characters from whatever cell I'm looking at. So I click OK. What did I do wrong here? I had already started to type write before I went into the function window, so it included it twice. So I just deleted that. So I have equals write S2 comma 5, and if I autocomplete it, it just gives me the zip codes. So that's one way to do this. And just to show you some similar things, if I had a function called left, it would take the first 5 letters from whatever cell I was looking at. And there's yet another function called mid. For mid, you have a reference. But then you have, in addition to the cell reference, you have the starting cell, starting part. So this would start in column, within the column, the second character in whatever cell you were looking at, and then 5 characters from there. So these are, they don't make sense for this particular data, but Sometimes you want to parse out different parts of a cell using the left, right, or mid function. I'm going to click undo a bunch of times until I get back to my original data. So now instead of using the right to create a zip, I'm going to use something called text to columns, which is another way to manipulate your data using a menu function rather than an embedded function. So I'm going to select the city column again, and now in the data menu I'm going to pick an option called text to columns. So if you hover over that, it says split a single column of text into multiple columns. So an example they give is if you have a first and a last name, you can select that column to separate them. So we're going to separate the city column into city and zip. So I'm going to click on this text to columns. And you can see there's two different choices. You can either have a fixed width. So if I had a string of data where I wanted to take, say, the first two characters and put it in one column, and then 3 through 10 or whatever, and put it in another column. In this case, you have a character such as a comma or tab that separates them. So I'm going to click Next because we want to use the delimited. Now, rather than tab, we want to separate using a space. And you have to be careful with this. This is kind of we only have 12 rows of data, so I can easily visually see that there isn't any additional spaces. So if I check the space, it's going to separate the city and the zip into two different columns, and I get a preview screen down at the bottom here, so I can click Next. And they're both going to be general format, or I could make them text format, and I'll click again and finish. And I actually wanted to do that a little bit differently. I wanted to insert a new column before I did that. So I'm going to repeat this again with a new column selected. I undid what I just did. So now I'm going to do text to columns, select delimited, space is already selected. I get my preview, and then I finish. And I just have to add a heading for zip. And I'll double click to resize. So now I'm going to save my file, and then we've completed all but the last step. So we've already did an edit replace when we created our deck of cards. So suppose we wanted to change the district from 9 to 10 in this column. If I don't select anything and then I go from my home menu to edit replace, let's say I want to replace 9 with 10 in the spreadsheet, there should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different things to replace. If I click replace all, it made 144 replacements. So something has gone terribly wrong. So what happened was, since I only had one cell selected, it replaced 9 with 10 everywhere in the spreadsheet, and including within different entries. So that was not at all what I wanted to do. So I'm going to click undo to get back, and you can see like it would have replaced the 9 here, anything within the number of acres, and so on in this neighborhood formula. So now I want to be a little bit more careful about how I do the edit replace. So I'm going to select just the column district. And now instead of replacing 9 with 10, I'm going to replace 09 dash with 10 dash. So I'm being a lot more specific about what I want to replace. So now when I replace all, it made 9 replacements and did it just how I need it. So this is just a sampling of different text editing that you may need to do in cleaning up your data to make it ready for different analysis. So now I'm going to save, and then I'll come back for the next video.